Well, you know what time of year it is, folks. It's time for me to talk about a game that nobody knows exists again. But unlike ADR, Die With Me, or Fliff, this game actually came out this year. Nobody Saves the World is a top-down adventure RPG made by the same people who made Guacamelee, where you swap forms and kill enemies and level up and stuff. And despite its gameplay that I'm sure you can relate to a million other games you've played before, there's actually a bit more depth here than you might assume. Okay, let's just get something out of the way first before I say what I'm about to say. This game is fun. Nobody Saves the World is a good game that you should play, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it up for nomination for Best Indie Title at the Druckmann Awards at the end of the year. However, there's a black-eyed elephant in the room that I need to address right now. I do not like this art style. Every character I meet feels like a cross between the Jackbox Fakin' It gang and the bottom of the barrel of Canadian cartoons met up at a D&D LARP fest and had an unredeemable amount of time in the Star Wars battle pod.
Oh shit, I'm sorry.
The fact that everything reminds me of the best DVD of a cartoon that I found in the Dollarama bargain bin makes my eyes want to jump out of my skull and take a one-way ticket into not fucking Hereville. But, with all that said, I appreciate its consistency. I like that even when you go from the generic fantasy overworld you start in, to eventually finding the fungus organ miasma of the later parts of the game that dip into eldritch horror, I like that it's all undeniably, unapologetically the same consistent art style throughout. It knows its inelegant fat lines and its crass character designs won't appeal to everybody, and instead of appealing to schmucks like me, it chooses to be itself. Dare I say, by the end of the game, it all started to become somewhat charming. So let's get into it. Nobody Saves the World starts you off with this little white nothing boy in a shed, equipped with the most reliable tool an RPG protagonist can start with: amnesia. You find that Nostramagus, the coolest boy in the land, has disappeared and that a calamity has taken over the world. Soon enough, you find a guy that you want to punch very badly who tells you not to pick up Nostramagus' wand, so, of course, you do it immediately. He throws you in a cell, and this is where the game really starts. Okay. So I'm sure many of you are already taking your shots for the predictable fantasy tropes drinking game, and I'm sure most of you are halfway through drunk dialing your ex-girlfriend and asking if you can speak to her wife's boyfriend. So here's where it gets interesting. That wand you picked up lets you become a rat. Yes, this is a big deal. Stay with me. Put the phone down, Jimmy. The rat has this little bitey attack that kills and poisons enemies, and a chompy attack that snacks on dudes you poisoned. You also eventually get this ability that blows up every single enemy you poison. The rat comes with several specific quests based around killing enemies, and by leveling it more, you get access to the ranger and the guard. Yes, in this game you swap between classes, ranging from a slug, a horse, a robot, a zombie, each of which come with their own differing stats and abilities, and that's fine on its own. Here's the hook though. Everybody's passive and secondary abilities can be put on every other character in the game. The poison passive you just leveled up with the rat can be put on the guard to do massive poison AoEs to enemies around him, or on the ranger to have classic poison-tipped arrows to stack up on enemies at a distance. Oh yeah, and that ranger has a secondary ability that lets you rapid-fire arrows. Hey, I wonder if... And it was at this moment I knew I was probably going to like this game. Now, I've declared from the rooftops of Thunder Club headquarters that I love when games allow for different personalized builds, because as a gamer, it feels great to discover that one playstyle that you stumble upon and end up loving. With 3 passive slots, 3 interchangeable skills, and 17 different forms to level up, there's tons of room for weird tinkering as you find that one combination that just clicks for you. Now, with that said, though the game does encourage you to find that one gameplay style you love, it's constantly throwing puzzles and puzzle challenges at you that make you figure out what skill combo will get you through them. A very early quest in this game is you talking to this guy who is known for killing rats in one punch, and your mission, as the rat, is to take a punch from him and not die. Leveling up and outstatting this guy is not an option, and he will kill you. It's a pretty simple quest, and to be honest, pretty easy once you understand what it's asking of you, but it acts as a great primer for some of the challenges later in the game. Dungeons are where this idea really clicks though. Dungeons have randomized tile sets every time you go in, but I wouldn't really call them roguelikes. Mostly because the only punishment for failing in them is that you have to start them over. But you still keep all the stuff you accumulate throughout. It's a lot more casual than your Isaacs and your Dead Cells, but it's still a pretty fun time. enemies will often have wards on them that have to be destroyed first by using the corresponding elemental attack, so pretty often you are going to have to inevitably swap out skills for whatever the dungeon needs from you. I like that the game does that, but it also brings me to a complaint with this game. You see, with so many forms, I started to have various characters specialize in breaking certain types of enemies, or taking enemies out from a distance, or certain characters based around generating health, and it became kind of annoying when the quickest way to swap to them was this constantly shifting quick select wheel. That can be a real problem when you're in the thick of it, and you realize you have to swap out when a giant pile of enemies are swarming you. If the game slowed down like in Doom's weapon select wheel, that could have been a fix. Alternatively, every half-decent controller has a D-pad that isn't used for any controls in this game. If you could map 4 transformations to that, it would be a much more efficient way to streamline switching without taking the player out of the action. I eventually stopped using the wheel altogether and started going into the menu to swap characters, and I think overall, pacing-wise, this is a bit of a misstep on the developer's part. Dungeons can have different modifiers that you'll have to account for. Sure, you've got things like your basic dungeons that act as level checks, where you just kind of run through and kill everything. But often you'll get modifiers like enemies gain health when you gain health, or enemies deal 9,999 damage. That was a fun one to get through, by the way. You'll have to switch things up to match the problem thrown at you. And while for most modified dungeons, you're pretty much golden once you find that combination of skills that works to kill everything, I like that the game forces you to actually think sometimes, instead of bashing your head against a wall with your favorite build. Every new form comes with a new way to play the game. The characters you get essentially split into melee and ranged trees, and the way each play can differ greatly. The Ghost does an AoE field around it that constantly inflicts fear on enemies, and it has lower defensive stats. But to counteract the fact that you have to get in close, but you can also die relatively quickly, it also has abilities like going intangible to avoid enemy attacks. The zombie has a lunging attack with pretty solid stats, but the downside is that it loses health constantly. One of its starting quests is just die. To counteract this huge downside, you can bite enemies to turn them into other zombies and regenerate health from dealing damage to enemies. And your zombies create other zombies, which in turn also heal you back. I don't have time to go over the pros and cons of each character, but I like that each of them seem to push you in a direction for a playstyle. Like I said, the zombie really wants to make other zombies, so it can counteract its whole dying thing. So naturally, you could focus on keeping your zombie minions alive with the monk's healing circle, or maybe just put on the ability that makes all your familiars explode. I'm not out here trying to sell you on the possibilities are endless, because they aren't. The heights of Nobody Saves the World don't reach the synergies of Bravely Default or the ridiculous pancake stats of abilities in Binding of Isaac, but what is here is balanced, well thought out, and it's enough to make you think about how you want to have fun with this game. One of the first things that actually surprised me about this game was how big the world map is. I don't know if it was because of my first impressions of its art style, but I just didn't expect it to be this big. There's around 20 hours of game here doing all the dungeons and most of the side quests, and the fodder you fight between objectives serves as a nice way to level up classes in between dungeons and try out new abilities as you go throughout the world. Speaking of those classes, it's actually pretty cool that exploration is partly tied to them. There's a ton of water begging to be explored, and if and when you want to see what is out there, you'll have to unlock a form that can traverse it. So yeah, your exploration is further tied to the process of leveling characters. With that said, the game doesn't give you the freedom to do things like rush to a certain class in the first dungeon. It does cap your progression based on which story-relevant dungeons you've beaten. I found this to be kind of a bummer at the midway point, actually, where I had everything leveled as far as it could go because I was taking my time doing side quests and side dungeons, but when you're really into this game, the most exciting thing happening isn't what will I find in the dungeon or what will I find in the world, it's what weird form am I going to get next and what weird abilities does it have. Obviously, everybody's mileage will vary, and my running out of things to unlock could be just a me thing. Nobody Saves the World is at its peak when it's throwing you quests that require you to use your abilities in a certain way to level up. And having it push me away for doing what it felt was too much of that made the game a bit more tedious for maybe an hour and a half. On those quests though, they start off pretty basic, like killing enemies or hitting a certain number of baddies with your AoE attack, but eventually they start to require abilities from other classes, like asking you to poison a certain number of characters as a class that isn't the rat, or using the horse's gallop ability to smash into enemies as the bodybuilder. Quests like these incentivize using combinations that you didn't think of, and I love how just leveling up these characters naturally shows the player how much fun they can have if they just try out certain combinations. I like that with all the different things you do. Dungeon challenges, quests, leveling, Nobody Saves the World never loses focus of what makes it fun to play. And I think that's pretty awesome. I guess next, I'm gonna have to address the humor in this game. Obviously, a game with an art style like this tends to keep its characters and story on the wacky side, and yeah, pretty much every quest or dialogue is punctuated by some kind of joke. Now, hey, I'm all in for wacky, tongue-in-cheek fantasy romps. One of my favorite games from a couple console generations ago was literally named Death Spank, but honestly, none of this game's jokes had me busting a gut laughing. But with that said, there are a couple decent moments. Like the one quest where you find true love as a horse, or just the design of these cat wizards, which I presume use some kind of scratchomancy. How about the fact that the bodybuilder is considered a range character because of this attack is technically a projectile? Hitting this game's conclusion, I found myself pretty satisfied with what it had to offer. I explored every corner of the map, leveled up every ability, bought every upgrade, sucked down every last drop of Capri Sun, and I felt like I got a complete, fun adventure. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there like me that will write this game off because of its art direction, and that is a real shame, because I think this candy has a lot to offer once you get past its wrapper. This game's around 30 bucks on the Nintendo Switch, or if you've got one of those fancy game passes, you probably already own it. So hey, in that case, there's no real downside to trying it out. I'm Kaznarious. I'll see you in October. Later, everybody. So I'm sure many of you are already taking your shots for the predictable fantasy tropes drinking game, and I'm sure most of you are halfway through drunk dialing your ex-girlfriend and asking if you can speak to her wife's boyfriend. So here's where it gets interesting. That wand you picked up lets you become a rat. Yes, this is a big deal. Stay with me. Put the phone down, Jimmy. Put the phone down, Jimmy. It's gonna be okay. Put the phone and the ball down, Jimmy. It's gonna be okay. I swear to you, life gets better. Life gets so much better than drunk dialing your ex-girlfriend's wife's cousin. Jimmy, you need to calm down and stop it. And you need to put your dick away, Jimmy.
Is that actually in the video?
No.
Good. That was awful. So you should call the rat Stuart Little.
No.